James Baldwin once said, "Neither love nor terror makes one blind. Indifference makes one blind." This is the Producers Lounge podcast, the best podcast online for tips and tricks on producing great film, television, and web content. Welcome back for Season 2, Episode 18, hosted and produced by GreaterAndGrander.com. On this week's episode, we're chatting with Carolyn McDonald, who has produced feature films including Buffalo Soldiers, and has been producing partners with Danny Glover on several projects. We discuss her journey from NYU to the Warner Brothers Publicity Department, to ICM, to working with independent filmmakers. She also shared with us some of the inside secrets of a development team at a mini-major film production company. Here now is my conversation with Carolyn McDonald. So, I wanted to ask, because, when we were working with Gabe many, many years ago, I never really asked you a lot about, your past. How'd you get into producing? Where'd you grow up? What got you interested in it in the first place,
I grew up in North Carolina on a farm in a little town called Wade, which is about 12 miles outside of Fayetteville. And Fayetteville, North Carolina, is known for being the home of Fort Bragg, 82nd Airborne.
Oh, okay.
So yeah, I grew up on a farm, and it's funny. I was just writing about this last night again. And at the time was an only child and was very precocious. I mean, it was a farm. I mean, we had chickens, we had hogs, we had, I didn't have a store-bought vegetable until I moved to New York when I was 14. And so we grew everything. I remember days we didn't have running water. So I had an outhouse and I had to pump water. So many of mornings in my chores in the afternoon was pumping water. And in the spring and summer was working in the garden, and we didn't have big fields, that we had to work, but it was a corn farm mainly that we didn't do large harvest sales, but we sold enough, to reseed and sort of sustain ourselves, and then working in the garden, that was our vegetable. I mean, it used to drive me nuts and still does sometimes to go into Whole Foods organic, when I used to grow all this stuff my entire childhood.
Oh, wow. So did you get interested in entertainment and getting into entertainment in Fayetteville, or was that after you moved to New York?
It was actually when I was a kid. I mean, it was the late 60s, early 70s, and television. I mean, I'd say because of Flip Wilson and Diane Carroll and Diana Ross and, watching Sidney Poitier, God bless him, I was able to meet him. I was able to meet him a couple of times, when he was alive. And watching people like that on television, really just sparked my interest. I was like that weird kid that was running around when I was 9 years old saying, I'm going to move to California and I'm going to be on TV and all that stuff. So I was literally that kid in the Warner Brothers cartoons too as well. So yeah, I had this dream since I was a kid to go in the film business, and was blessed enough to eventually do that.
Uh-huh. And then did you go to school in New York for film school, or what happened after that?
Yeah, the next step after I moved to New York, Port Chester, which is about a half-hour train ride, 45-minute train ride outside Manhattan in Westchester County. I went to high school there, and I started doing plays, acting in all the plays, and a classmate of mine, who's no longer with us, Clarence Gilbert, told me what a screenplay was one day. He was really into writing screenplays. And he was saying he was writing these screenplays. I was like, you mean people on TV, they don't make that stuff up that they say, And so I learned what a screenplay was, and I decided that I wanted to write, because I always wrote journals and poems and these scenes. I would just write these two people scenes, like plays, one act plays. So when he told me about that, I wanted to be a screenwriter, and then still applied to school for acting, and auditioning. So I auditioned for the acting program at SUNY Purchase, but I did not get in as an actor, but did go in as liberal arts. So I, studied English literature, writing, prose, and sociology there, and did this on-campus workshop again. I think it was a Black theater workshop somebody ran. We do these improvs as an actor. But it didn't have a film program at the time. So there was one TV writing class that I took. And then I wasn't sure what I was going to do, and someone said to me, "Well, there's you can transfer to other schools that have writing programs." And so I started to applied to
Hmm.
USC, and then I heard, I'm sorry, not USC, UCLA.
Uh-huh.
But also I heard that NYU was like the premier writing program and filmmaking program. So
Hmm.
like I said, I was in Westchester County and I took the train down to New York one day to visit the campus and discover the Holy Grail. And so and I was like, oh my God, I got to go to this school. So at the time, it was the first year of the dramatic writing program. So I got accepted into that and kind of didn't look back on that respect. But simultaneously, I got very lucky, very blessed. You work hard and you're intentional, but then you have those, strokes of luck or things that happen. I had a therapist at the time whose college roommate had married the head of Warner Brothers Television in New York.
Oh, wow.
And so I applied for an internship there
Hmm.
for the summer, because I was working with her. I got a job working with her. She was a journalist. Her name was Magda Palaci Bleier, and she was sort of like the Belgian Barbara Walters.
Oh,
And
wow.
so Magda connected us. I'm sorry, Noemi connected me to Magda, and I started doing transcribing interviews. Like at the time, you remember, I don't know if anybody's listening to this is old enough to remember the foot pedals of tapes, So I was
Oh.
transcribing these interviews with these people. I'll never forget, it was Woody Allen, it was Gloria Swanson, it was William Holden, Brooke Shields, really like big people at the time that she was doing these articles and interviews on, so many. And it was an education. That Clint Eastwood, I think, was one of them. And I was like a kid. I was like 19, 20 years old at the time. And so it was a real education, about the film industry from that perspective. And so I did, got to NYU. And so at that time also, again, it's when I applied in the summer, when I applied for this internship at Warner Brothers, that I heard about. But the funny cool thing about it was that I didn't get into the internship because they had, for some reason, they'd filled up. But I got hired in their in-house sort of temp agency back at the time. Corporate, Warner Communications, and they had in-house agencies, or I was called a floater. So when
Right.
secretaries went on vacation, they would send the floater, to the
Hmm.
desk. And the great thing about it, which I'm still to this day grateful for it rather than the internship, because I would watch the interns and they were doing these like research reports and they were, just doing these little things. Me, meanwhile, I would float from the story department. I'd go from the marketing department. I go to the distribution department. They had me screening films. They had me handing flyers. I was having to be
Wow.
like literally going to, over the course of that summer, I went to like 5 different departments within Warner Brothers, television and movies and all that. So I remember the first movie I had to watch,
Hmm.
William Hurt died the other day. The first movie I
Mm.
had to watch was Body Heat. I had to go to the screening of Body Heat to cover it as an intern, to go back to the executives and say, what did the audience do? What did people like it? Did people applaud? So that was
Hmm.
one of my first jobs in the industry.
That is amazing. That's awesome. And
Mhm.
actually, it's funny. I didn't realize that we had so much overlap because, like, I grew up in Stamford, Connecticut, right?
That's right. That's
Yeah.
right. My dad
So
used to live there. I used to go there when I was a teenager. Yeah.
yeah, yeah, and like soon, like for a lot of people, like SUNY Purchase was the holy grail as far as the
Mhm.
drama department and the film department.
Mhm.
When I was there, and then this is really random, but like you mentioned Body Heat. My dad actually was the TV distributor for that for a short period
Really?
of time. Yeah, yeah. So
Really?
yeah,
Huh.
but
Small world.
yeah, yeah. I'm curious, while you were at NYU, were there any favorite professors that you had that you really liked?
Wow, it's so long ago. Yes, my screenwriting teacher, I loved him so much. Len Jenkin, I think he's
Uh-huh.
still there. I just loved him because he would give us this out of the box assignments. And I think the first day of class, he said something to the effect of, I can't teach you how to write.
Mhm.
I can just get you to write and, stimulate your imagination. So I remember him coming in the class one day and turning this chair upside down on his desk and say, "What is that?" And you had
Mhm.
to like come up with, we knew it was a chair, but we knew that wasn't what he was asking. Then he would do things like, write a horror thing. And I remember write a horror movie. And I remember writing this outline for something that resembled what came out. I'll never forget Independence Day with aliens and stuff. And I took it back to him with, aliens taking over the world. And he wrote on my paper, "Where is the horror?" And I was like, "Don't you think it's scary that aliens would come and take over the world?" And I went, and but yeah, he was really great. And I'm trying to think. I had a filmmaking teacher. Actually, Steven Soderbergh was in one of my classes. We had this class we had to do.
Oh.
I didn't know him at the time,
Uh-huh.
but we had a class called Sight and Sound, which I think still exists. In some incarnations, like the first class you have to take doing, black and white,
Mhm.
just, nonverbal, like, what do you call it? Silent movies. You move, to there, then you add sound, sync and all that. So,
Mhm.
but yeah, those are the classes I remember off the top of my head. Yeah.
That's incredible, wow. So then when did you graduate from NYU?
That's another good question too. I actually did not graduate.
Oh, you were the Steve Jobs of
I
NYU
was the
Film
Steve
School.
Jobs and Elon, all of that. That's why it's so funny to hear those stories, to see that show. What is it? The Dropout. That miniseries it's on. Because I
Oh.
did drop out, but it was intentional because I couldn't take out another student loan. I mean, at the time, my mother was on welfare. I had all
Mm.
financial aid. I didn't have anything. It was like I had either work study, which remember work study, and I had a great work study job. I worked at this gallery called the Kitchen. It was a performance art gallery in Soho, and
Mhm.
Laurie Anderson and John Cage and Eric Bogosian, all these people would come through to it. Nantazaki Sean Gay playwrights, it was amazing. Brian Eno introduced his installations that went on to become music videos before the
Oh.
MTV days. It was a magical place, and that was my work study job.
Mhm.
But as far as when the tuition went up, as it does,
Mhm.
the following semester, and then to make your film, I just couldn't afford it. I just, I couldn't, and then I couldn't imagine taking out. I think it was going to be something like about 35 grand a year, and that was back then
Mhm.
to for, student loans, and I just couldn't imagine doing that. I just didn't. So I went back to where I'd done the, job at Warner Brothers, and I asked them if they and I kept in touch with the, what do you call the HR people, because I was doing that floater, thing. So I knew all
Right.
these people. So I
Mhm.
went back and asked them if they had a job, and they luckily did have a job as an assistant, in the, advertising and publicity department.
Oh, okay. So then where did you start in the, advertising and publicity department? Or was it a positive experience or?
Yeah, it was again another experience which I look back on. I kind of did backwards, and was learning about branding, and I had to write these log lines for the newspapers, for
Mhm.
like the cartoons and every movie that came out. I had to. We did the TV campaigns, and so again, kind of dating myself, but it was like at the height of like HBO and Showtime when cable was coming on. So our in our department, my boss Ed Blyer
Mhm.
they were like when we were in television sales, like you said your dad did
Yeah,
distribution.
yeah.
We were responsible for the TV campaigns, because
Mhm.
sometimes the posters were different. I remember the Blade Runner poster was different than the feature
Mhm.
poster, and the Road Warrior poster was different for TV than it was for the feature campaign. So it was that kind of stuff, and all the tie-in things. And so it was a really great gig for two reasons: is I got to know everybody that was in New York, all the networks, all the cable, people, because I also, in addition to handling it, was my job to handle all this stuff. And I ran the mailing list. I was the associate assistant manager of publicity and advertising. So I was the trafficker of all of this marketing. Like I had the boss that wrote it, I would proofread it, go to the print shop, da da da. I was the mailing labels, get it out to so and so. and it was the tie-in books or the necklaces for the cartoons or posters or the album soundtrack for Chariots of Fire.
Hmm.
These albums at the time, all the, creating campaigns around. I remember I worked on a campaign for The Outsiders. And I came up with and I gradually would try and insert my ideas because again, it was like I was just
Uh-huh.
supposed to just put stuff in the envelopes enough. And that so again, I'm a 22-year-old kid or 21, 22-year-old kid. So I'd say, well, don't you think it would, why don't you try this, And so one couple of campaigns I worked on was The Outsiders because I was again on the desk of this department. I was the person to answer the phone. And I also got the mail. And
Uh-huh.
so what started to come in were these fan letters for the movies Outsiders. Remember Tom Cruise and Ralph Macchio and all these things.
Oh.
So these girls, when you hear all these girls were writing these fan letters. I guess they got Warner Brothers, for some reason they landed on my desk and I was, sitting there and I was like, oh, these girls, write these letters. And I said, they were trying to create this, remember the 4-color ads for Variety, and they still have them actually still there. So I was like, well, why don't you like use these letters in the campaign? They're fan letters, and they're writing how much they love the movie. And everybody kind of looked at each other and then looked at me and like, what did you say? I said, yeah, it's like, here's all these letters, if anything's going to sell the movie that make people want to know, see that people watch the movie, this is what you should do. And they
Uh-huh.
did it. They went
Nice.
with that. And the other thing I came up with was for the cartoons because I was overseeing the cartoon stuff too at the time, and nobody cared about the cartoons. But I was a kid watching the cartoons as a kid and still loved them as a almost adult. Watching them on Saturday mornings with some Lucky Charms and
Hmm.
so I still love the cartoons, and so I came up with this campaign or proposal of how to resurrect the cartoon campaigns. And I just said, let's do like frozen foods, or let's do, take the necklaces and put them with children's clothes. I mean, it was like a 3 or 4 or 5-page proposal.
Uh-huh.
And I just took it on my own initiative to write it. And they went through and incorporated like 3 or 4, 2 or 3 of those. I know they did the frozen foods because I just went and found them, in fact, for some share with them.
You should be getting royalties.
You think, right? And but yeah, they implemented that stuff and it was fun. It was a lot of fun and
Mhm.
creating things, campaigns for the conventions and yeah. So
And these were the heavy hitters. These are Bugs Bunny and Daffy Duck, I
yeah,
imagine. And
yeah, they were the heavy hitters. And then the feature stuff, it was the tail. How many Superman movies were there? I know I didn't do the first one. I don't think it was the second. I think I did the third and the fourth. I did remember those Clint Eastwood movies. I worked on that. I did work on Blade Runner. I did work on Chariots of Fire. I did work on the first feature script I read was Night Shift. That was Brian Grazer's first film. Because we had to go through scripts too. The other thing that I didn't do all the time, but one of the things was a task of the department was
Mhm.
we had to read the scripts for a network dubs because if there were any curse words, they
Right.
had to go through an ADR or a dub or a, bleh. So it was going through the script and seeing where that needed to be done.
Mhm. Well, that's cool. And so you're in your 20s, you're at Warner Brothers Publicity, and then eventually you move on to be the producing partner of Danny Glover. And I'm wondering how did you make that transition? Was it a long transition? What were the steps in between?
Well, I left Warner Brothers, I say like 83. I didn't go meet Danny until like coming up on 10 years later. And in between that
Oh.
time, I worked again in publicity at Children's Television Workshop, and I had a daughter and I took some time off with her and
Mhm.
um that period. And then I had another key job. It was that transition. Well, 2 jobs actually. When I went
Uh-huh.
back to work after my daughter was really young, I went to work at ICM
Mm.
in New York for Nancy Josephson before she moved to LA. And I worked on her desk for a few months. But like I said, before she moved to Los Angeles. But that was again another educational experience, because I'll never forget the day I walked in there and I saw all these scripts in these cabinets, and I was like, oh my God, this is what happens to scripts. They don't all get made, they're just in these file cabinets. That's what happens to them. So that was like the NYU dramatic writing person going in there, oh my God. So working with her was, again, learning about the deals, learning about,
Mhm.
because we were focusing on selling books to TV. This is kind of the last incarnation of when they called them miniseries. Now they're called limited series.
Mhm.
So this is in the late 80s, late 80s, yeah, mid-late 80s, when they were doing more miniseries. So it was selling books rights, and writers setting up the TV shows in New York. We had some writers on Saturday Night Live, and I can't remember, there might have been one or two other things that were going on in New York at the time. Marta Kaufman and David Crane were clients pre-friends of
Mhm.
hers. So yeah, I was doing that New York stuff, getting to know writers. And then the next job, I got hired out of there to run the story department at Cinecom in New York, which is a
Well,
small
that sounds
indie
familiar. Yeah. What
company.
is
Yeah, they were
Cinecom?
sort of like neck and neck with Miramax. They were the other small indie company
Mhm.
with Cinecom, and kind of were the arch rivals of each other, and you could see who won the race, right?
Yeah.
History tells you who won
The
the race.
the wrong one won the race, but
Yeah,
okay.
okay.
Yeah.
Debatable upon your perspective, but anyway.
Yeah.
So yeah, I was there, and ran the story department, which entailed, again, because it was a small company too, my direct boss was head of business affairs. And
Mhm.
so I was getting in scripts. I was starting to meet agents in town, reading, tons of reading. This is where the weekend reading, it was essentially creative executive, and
Mhm.
then working a little in business affairs, because again, this was the time, it was a small company. So I kind of had dual jobs. It was, making sure contracts were put together in packets to go, because again, I'd had that experience at ICM
Mhm.
because it was very contract driven, working with Nancy on those things. So I had that knowledge.
Mhm.
And then it was really my learning from NYU, being on the other side of not the writer, but the reader,
Mhm.
and understanding in these story department meetings on Monday morning, which one was going to move forward, and then kind of getting, in that environment of being the exec to pitch the project to your bosses, to get to your bosses to read it, and all that.
So in those three steps, the Warner Brothers, the ICM, and then Cinecom, what were some of the most surprising things you learned as going into those organizations?
Um, I think I learned about the biggest lesson I learned was inner office politics,
Mhm.
um, and how how uh, influential that is to
Mhm.
whether or not a person's film gets made or not made.
Mhm.
And I'll speak directly to this too, because I think, younger writers, not even, I won't say younger writers, let's say starting out writers, whatever your age, is, and you submit your script to a company, even if you have an agent, it's
Mhm.
looking at what relationships people have with people. Say, for instance, new writer has new agent who's not new, is new to an agency, new relationship with a studio.
Mhm.
So what's your relationship? Is the person that you have a relationship with in that company
Mhm.
somebody that has the voice of decision maker, or is that person the decision maker that you have the relationship with? So there's a whole layer of a dance that goes on, and if you don't have an agent at all or a rep manager, and you submit to the CE's creative executive company, what's their relationship again on the
Mhm.
totem pole to get voice to the decision maker? I mean, now, of course, it's all about elements and who's attached, and, the better with that. But, that being said, it's always you as writer, find that other win for that person you're submitting to. Find that win for them. Help them say yes. Help them make their job look good. If you
Mhm.
can bring them a talent that they are trying to get in business with, hey, you've got a win-win. You've created an opportunity for yourself, as well as helping someone out at the same time. So I would offer that advice to any writer, being more business savvy and understanding the nature of these relationships. And that's easily the biggest lesson I learned.
Basically get it as close to a green light as possible so that all
Mhm.
they have to do is just rubber stamp and hand you the check.
Yeah, and yeah, and have all your elements, as many as you can, your talents, and your
Yeah.
DP, your team, as many of your team, if you're that indie filmmaker,
Yeah.
wanting to work at that level, even with like your second or third or fourth film, to have all that, because your first film now is going to be on your iPhone or whatever you can put together to get it done with.
Yeah.
So, but yeah, be aware of relationships, as you're going in.
What you mentioned about relationships is funny because I used to work at this place. I won't say their name. Let's just call them Schmeramount Studios. But but what I found out when I worked there was basically the story department, all of the creative executives, they would basically have a situation where each creative executive would do a weekly cut of dailies to kind of show off the progress that the film was making as they were being filmed.
Mhm.
And then they would bring it before all of the other creative executives, and the head of the story department, head of development department, basically fostered a very gladiatorial um, atmosphere where they would just attack one another. It was
Mm,
like Thunderdome almost.
wow. Wow.
Yeah. So,
I'm
uh,
not surprised. I mean, it was like that at this small company that I worked at too, because you had, even again, it was a small company,
mhm.
but you know, they were people that were more. I'm trying not to use negative words.
Mhm.
That were more savvy at establishing relationships and getting things done and getting themselves moved up the ladder and all of that. So,
Yeah.
and at some point it's it it isn't about the film, but it is about it is and it isn't about the project. It's about, whose film is it? What can it do for us? Which is, business is business is business. You want that,
Mhm. Mhm.
needless to say, but sometimes the agendas override the quality of material. And I think we've seen that.
Yeah. Yeah. Office politics just winds up sabotaging a perfectly good project. Yeah.
Can happen. I've seen it happen.
Yeah. So I do want to ask this also, if you feel comfortable answering it.
Mm.
Um, you are an African American woman who came up in the entertainment industry in the 80s and 90s. I'm curious what experiences, what potentially negative experiences you had uh, in those interactions, and what filmmakers today should keep in mind or learn from that.
Yeah, I'm happy to answer that.
Mhm.
I'll go back again in my own history. At Warner Brothers,
Mhm.
it was so interesting because I think I was such a purple cow, like this, black girl,
Uh-huh.
lead, and there was one other black woman that was there, but I was that person that I didn't know I wasn't supposed to.
Mhm.
Meaning that you're just supposed to answer the phones. You're just supposed to stand here and check people's names off. Who told you you were supposed to create a campaign? Who said, And so
Right.
I did these things not knowing that I wasn't supposed to. Um,
Mhm.
and it wasn't until years later, it's like you joked about the residuals. I was like, wait a minute. They probably hired an ad agency and paid them like hundreds of thousands of dollars, maybe millions, to come up with that stuff I just did there. Okay.
Mhm.
But it wasn't till decades later that I looked at that, and I looked at it, it's like, yeah, you're the little brown kid in the corner. You just did it for them for free, and they took advantage of the fact that you didn't know that you didn't know. And I look back on it, and I do think that if I would have been a white male, I would have gotten promoted. I would have, became a manager. I would have become a vice president because here I was, I did these campaigns and all that. And so that's experience number one. But I don't look back on it again. I was a kid that didn't know. I was doing this stuff because it was fun. I was having a blast. I'm like I came from a farm, in North Carolina where I used to watch Bugs Bunny on a black and white floor model. Here I am on the 13th floor, and I've got Chuck Jones drawing me my own, Roadrunner and Coyote. And I'm like,
My
hey,
God,
I
that's
don't,
amazing.
I would have paid them to let me do this, what I'm saying? So it didn't, it didn't phase me, there's a blissful ignorance to think, hey, maybe you should have been promoted. Hey, we should have asked for more money at least because you didn't get a raise, for bringing all these things to fore. I was just like a kid in a sandbox playing a playground.
Mhm.
So and again, like I said, it wasn't until I look back on it to say, hey, if you'd have been a white male, you would have been treated differently for the work you were doing,
Right.
but at this point, like I said, it's decades later. At the other job, at the company where I was running the story department, um, I faced blatant racism,
At
and I'm not gonna
Seneca?
name
Or
names. Yes, I'm not gonna name specific names. People can do the deep dive if they're interested.
uh-huh.
But there was a situation where this woman had just gotten out of college and she was promoted ahead of me to some title. And it was after I'd done all this work of running the store department, running all these things, and running it, doing a good job, doing a great job,
Uh-huh.
and I had discovered a couple of projects again, kind of in my own, ignorant bliss. There was, some titles that were around Broadway and stuff that went, we didn't get, but I had found. And even with that, I'll be very frank and honest, there was one or two projects that I brought in, and I honestly believe, again, whatever you want to do the deep dive, because
Mhm.
I was the black girl that brought it in, nobody paid attention to it. And so
Mm.
then when they became there was a bidding war going on because CAA ended up represented, and they were, why didn't you it's like, I told you about this project like a month ago. I had lunch with the agent. I had this in the reading list. So
Mhm.
now don't I brought this in like a month ago.
Right.
So that happened, but then with this, girl getting promoted over me, and I remember feeling so horrible because at the time I've got a 3-year-old child to feed with, keep a job. And I had a friend that my friend who I'm still friends with. His dad was a big attorney, in New York, and they volunteered to do a class A discrimination suit. And I decided not to do it. This was in 1989
Mhm.
because I knew I would never work again. I knew it. And I did have a case, because I sat down tearfully and told them the story in this Madison Avenue law firm, what happened, and showed them my resume. This girl just graduated, she's a white girl. I'm, a black woman. And I clearly had a case, but
Mhm.
I decided not to file it because I knew I would not work again.
Right. Right.
And but and I continued to work. I kept the job, until the company kind of went under, and people started getting laid off and stuff. And then that's when I moved to California a couple of years after that.
Hmm. I'm so sorry you had to go through that. That's terrible.
Yeah, it was at the time very painful. It was a very, very painful thing. But what was most painful is, like, I knew I had to keep a job. I knew that I could not go through with this. I knew it. I knew that because it would come in the paper. I mean, I don't know back then in 89 how much of a media thing it would be if, like, the guy now is called, suing the NFL. We haven't heard about him in a couple weeks, so so I don't know if it would have been that big of a deal, but I know within the industry, and New York at the time being a small place, there's not many black people at that time working at studio, at networks or studios. So it would have been a thing. I knew that,
Right.
because I, get between ICM and Cinecom and Warner Brothers being in these circles. There were not many of us, black, meaning us, black people, black women, and
Right.
I knew that I would never work again.
Right. Right. So then when you came out to California, where did you get started? I assume that you well, you said Cinecom had gone under by this point. So
Mhm.
when you came out to California, what was the job hunt experience like? Because that's, I don't know, for me, like what I've experienced, if you have a lot of contacts in a city like New York or Atlanta, trying to restart over in other cities, incredibly difficult.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It was, and I didn't know I knew a couple of people,
Mm-hmm.
but not a lot. I didn't know anybody, and when I came out to, LA the first time was, I really wanted now, having been through that experience at Cinecom, because there were, I won't even go into the other microaggressions that happened there. I just won't even spend the
Oof.
time, but there were many. Um, but I decided, because of all that, that I don't wanna go back and work in a corporate. I could never. I mean, I still have a phobia, about being in corporate
Mm,
entertainment, because of that, because there are so many things that are unsaid, said, again, microaggressions. Now they came up with a word for it 20 years later, and so I really wanted to write. I was like, okay, I've read all these scripts. I've been writing, I want to get a job. I really, because this was again the 90s. So you had all these black sitcoms on the air. So I was like, I want to work for, write for like Family Matters or something. So I was really bent on doing that.
mm-hmm.
And so I'd gone to a couple of meetings, and I didn't really know how to go about it. I didn't really have a spec script. I'd written this spec for Amazing Stories, like this half hour thing. And I didn't know to write a spec of the show, of a comedy. I hadn't done that. So I didn't really have a big body of work. So I just hit the temp agency thing. And you gotta eat. So as long as you can type, you can find a job. And and so I was sending out the script I had, and I was trying to write another one and trying to work and get my daughter was in elementary school. So doing, juggling all this stuff, as a single mom. I ran into a friend of mine, again, those moments of stroke of luck or whatever. And I ran into a friend of mine's and her sister at a barbecue or something. And she says, "Oh, I pitched to this woman at Danny Glover's company, and she's leaving. Would you be interested in applying for the job?" And I said, "Yeah, but I don't know anybody here. I don't know the agents. I don't know the town. There's no way I'm gonna get this job." She goes, "Well,
Right.
here's her information. Here's the fax number. Remember faxes? Fax number. Here's her phone number. Why don't you just call and fax your resume over?" And so I was doing this temp job at an agency. I think it was the Paul Kohner agency. And, so I sent my resume, and I didn't think anything of it. I was like, "They're not gonna hire me because I don't know anybody. I don't have a job in California?" So
Mm-hmm.
anyway, long story shorter, they did call me in, for I was like, "Wait, what? Really? Are you kidding me?" And so I go in to meet with Danny's agent, and I'm still, like, really reluctant. I'm like, I'm not gonna get this job because I don't know anybody." And it was like the anti-job interview. I was like the person that was like, "I'm gonna give you all the reasons why you should not hire me. Okay, I don't know anything." And so I wasn't really hustling, but I did have a resume, to my credit. And I think the fact that I had worked at Warner Brothers and I'd really embellished my Warner Brothers stuff, because I had did that stuff, so I had my marketing, and, I embellished that. And then I was a CE at Cinecom. I did the job. I had it on paper. I had a strong resume. But again, that non-tangible factor of knowing people, I'm like, I don't know anybody. They're not gonna give me this job.
Mm-hmm.
So his agent told me, "When are you available to come back and meet Mr. Glover?" And I was like, "Really? Did I just hear you say that you want me to come back and meet Mr. Glover? Are you kidding me?" So I said, "Yeah, sure. Yeah. Are you serious though?" He's like, "Are you serious though? Is this like a joke?" So it was so funny too, because again, I being new to LA, and this was again the 90s, before there were cell phones, before, you had the message services, right? And so I couldn't pay my message service bill. And so I couldn't pay my message service bill to get my phone messages, because of course I'm looking for jobs and, going after all this stuff.
Right.
So I go back, I had this long temp assignment. So I was at the temp job one day, and they paged me over the intercom. "Is there a Carolyn McDonald working here? Temp, blah, blah, blah." So I picked up the phone, And it's the agent's assistant, Danny's agent's assistant, saying to me, "Oh my God, we've been looking for you. Have you gotten our messages?" And I didn't want to say I couldn't afford to pay my message bills. I didn't get your message. Can you come in and meet with Glover today at 4 o'clock? And I was like, okay. Yeah. And I remember I didn't have a suit on. I had like some raggedy shoes and this ugly shirt. And, I'm like, yeah, okay, fine. And I was like, okay, if they hired me, if I don't get a job because I got raggedy shoes on, then it wasn't meant to be anyway.
Yeah.
I go to meet him, and again, the same thing. I was like, they ain't gonna give me this job. I know why they have me here. And it's like, so Danny was asking me about what I read, and I felt like I was like hanging out with an uncle or something. I was like, yeah, North Carolina, where I grew up, and I was telling the story, and I kept going, I love Silverado. That's like, I love Westerns, and I love, what was it, the other one, Lonesome Dove. I was like, oh, I love Western. And so that thing, and so they asked me something I'll never forget. There was this question that the agent asked me that, um, you're new to this city, because I kept making the point, I don't know anybody. I kept saying over and over again, I don't know anybody here, I can, and he says, you don't know anybody here, this is a really tough business, and how do you handle it? And I think like the abusive marriage, the horrible job in New York, I said, you know what? I just got to LA with $280 and a duffel bag and a 7-year-old kid. What can anybody do to me? Like, really, it can't be all that hard, And they kind of looked at each other, and I went, I know I didn't get this job because that was the dumbest shit you could ever say, why did you? So I left, got up, and like about a week later, about a week later, Danny calls me and offers me the job,
Wow.
and yeah, it was great, it was really, really cool, because it was kind of like vindication, I felt, for all the other stuff I'd gone through in a way.
Mhm.
Because it was based on my merit. I didn't know anybody. I did not get this job because anybody made a call, to anybody. You know what I mean?
Right. Right. That's and in fact, you as you pointed out, you didn't know anybody, so you kept kind of letting your imposter syndrome like stand in the way for you.
Right. Like imposter syndrome on steroids. I don't know anybody. I told you I don't know anybody.
So then, as far as like building up as a producer, I think we both kind of know what the kind of day-to-day tasks are, but just to kind of give a sense, like that, you're reading scripts, you're taking meetings with agents. What did you do to advance your portfolio besides those two items?
I really was trying to make films. I really was trying to find things to get done. And it was, really, like you said, meeting writers and finding really good writers. I remember the first project we did for HBO was by this writing team who had an agent, but they weren't like big writers, but this is where, again, relationships. I didn't know anybody in um in the industry, but I'd gone to college with Ving Rhames, Wesley Snipes, Gina Belafonte, and at SUNY Purchase, and so they're they were friends. I didn't know Wesley well. I knew Ving well, and I kind of kept in touch with Gina. Maybe not, hadn't seen her, but there were people that I knew, actors, and had met other actors. Again, Keith David I'd met when I was at Cinecom, and the sort of relationships like that. So when HBO, this Project America's Dream came, serendipitously I'd heard, because it was a trilogy of short stories by Black writers, Maya Angelou, John Henrik Clarke, and Richard Wright. And I'd heard through the grapevines, I don't remember how I heard it, that Wesley was doing a documentary on John Henrik Clarke. And so this is, you ask about what else did I do? The writers knew somebody. I think Wesley was shooting the movie, I think not Money Train. It was Money Train with Jennifer Lopez. And we went down to the set in LA of the subway set to meet up with Wesley, because again, as anybody, it's like, if you could navigate around the agents, and I think I don't know who he was with. He might've been at CAA at the time. to just, talk to him. So it was really, they were like, we're going to get you down there, just talk to him, just, just say you went to purchase and ask him if he'll do this. So I did, they found, got me down there and sort of like, here, talk to Wesley and ask him, will he do this? And to his credit, he said yes. To his credit, he said yes, because it was like at HBO, it was like, the broomstick thing, the bring me the witch's broomstick and we'll, take you to Kansas. So it's like, bring me Wesley Snipes, we'll make this movie. And so it was almost a dare, I think. I don't think they thought I could do it, or. But he said yes, and that's what got us the green light. Wesley and Danny agreeing to be on camera as well, and not just executive producer. So it's like you say, what else did I do? It was really, I learned, even though it's always been a thing to have a name attached, but I think I learned that early on too, again, from working with Glover, to have, a name value to your project. That's a good name, that's really into the project, and that it's a win-win for them. Because I think if Wesley didn't know who John Henrik Clarke was, and that was the one we wanted him to do, Boy Who Painted Christ Black, he knew the short story. He knew John Henrik Clarke work. So it's just a serendipitous situation. It wasn't like I came and brought him something that, was irrelevant to his personal, vision as an artist.
Yeah, absolutely. So again, it comes back to that question of like personal connections, knowing who likes what and who dislikes what. And then also you wound up making two other movies with Danny, and they were both Westerns. Speaking of your love of Westerns.
Well, one of them was Western, one wasn't. Buffalo Soldiers is a Western for sure. Yes, that's still to this day my favorite film that I've made. It was such an amazing experience. Just to tell this story, about the West. I caught some flack in hindsight about, I didn't realize I was catching flack. That's another thing that'll happen to you out here sometimes. You won't know you're catching flack. And so, for hiring a white male director on it. But I would do it again because of this particular director. He was really good. Charlie Haid. People know him for his Renko from Hill Street Blues, but he's such a great director. And in developing the script, working with this woman, Susan Reinhardt, and one thing that Glover's an amazing story script person. I still to this day tell writers that if you can get a good actor to give you notes, you're going to have the best notes. And something that Glover saw early on about the project was incorporating Native American culture. And so I don't know if you've seen the film, it's half the story is infused with Native American culture and the dynamic of African American, Native American. And that was so insightful at that time. And still to this day, I don't know that anybody's made that connection. And I thank God for Amazon, it's on DVD. I don't know if anybody's like what do you call it? A Netflix or Amazon Prime is streaming it, but it's such a great film. It's a really, really good film. Charlie did an amazing job with that script, with that visuals as a visual storyteller. And it is it's a Western. It's through and through, Western.
Right. That's incredible. And then you and Danny parted ways, and then
we made Freedom Song first. That was a period piece that was back at TNT with Phil Robinson directed, and he wrote and directed it because he had been developing the project as a feature at a studio, and I can't remember which one, but we had done Buffalo Soldiers, we'd done America's Dream. And won an Image Award for America's Dream, and was nominated for Emmys and DGA awards for Buffalo Soldiers. So we were, we had some heat, as a company, as a producer. And so, I went back to Phil and I said, we just did these films, at TNT, we kind of, at HBO, we kind of have carte blanche. We can, they're really looking to continue to be in business with us. And so I think his project got put into turnaround from the studio. And I said, would you be interested in making it as a TV film? I think, I can't speak for them, but it'll, I think they do it. So I did make the call to TNT, and they were like, what time can he be here? Basically, like, are you kidding me? We would love to be in business with him. Again, if Danny wants to do it.
Mhm, mhm.
And so that's how, that happened, is again connecting dots, and as much as, the tangible producing, it's a relationships again, building relationships and having an eye for material, and
Mhm.
voice.
But yeah, that's really cool. So now you're doing Everglow and trying to get that off the ground. And you're gonna direct that. Is it the only project you're working on right now, or do you have more
I have
diversity?
different kinds of projects in the works. I mean, I'll go backwards to go forward a little bit. I
Sure.
directed a short film after Danny, we parted ways, just didn't have the company together, and we talked about working on other stuff. But he came to do a short film I directed called P.N.O.K. I don't know if you've ever seen this short that I
I
directed.
don't think no.
Yeah, it's Danny's in it, Tina Lifford's in it, Elle Fanning, little pint-sized Elle Fanning. She was 9 at the time.
Uh-huh.
Robert Richard, Irma P. Hall,
Mm-hmm.
and it's a really cool short film about a day in the life of these two soldiers that are on casualty notification duty, telling families that they lost someone in active battle. And this was right at the height of the Iraqi war in 2006, 2005 when I did it. And I was working as a mentor for Project Involve, and my mentee had written this page about these two soldiers, and I kept was kind of haunted by it, and I wanted to explore that because again, going back to growing up around Fort Bragg, I saw that, the soldiers
Mm-hmm.
show up to tell families that they lost someone. So it kind of resonated, a day in the life of what it was like for them and how hard it was for them, as men to have to go to three families and tell them that they
Mm.
lost someone. So that kind of got me to, and this was in 2005, and it was way before the surge of everybody say they're looking for black women directors, because then it was very hard going back to, I'll
Mm-hmm.
speak to that a little bit too. It was very, 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 still hadn't gotten a job as a director after that. Now, again, the white male will do a music video and get handed $100 million, or you do a short film and you get like a series,
Mm-hmm.
and in 2005 that wasn't happening for me, and it was very discouraging. I mean, I have a thick skin for some things I don't have as much thick of a skin, but it's not only that. I think the older I get, my tolerance for,
Bullshit.
yeah, and idiocy just grows real thin, and
Mm-hmm.
I got offered a job down in Nashville, and I took that, and I went there for a while, and that's a whole nother story. But I did a really great program down there working with inner city youth and teaching them about films and making
Oh,
some really
cool.
cool films. I mean, I had so much fun making it. I had as much fun making those films as I did making Buffalo Soldiers, because it was working with these black kids from the hood, and teaching them about film and having their own stories, creating these scripts from their stories of their experiences in their lives every day. And they were in front of the camera and behind the camera, and they got to see themselves on the big screen at the Nashville Film Festival. So it was such a rewarding experience, And during that time when I was there doing that, I just kept writing. I just kept writing scripts. I probably wrote like 3 or 4 screenplays and no, two series pilots and 2 feature scripts when I was in Nashville.
Oh, wow.
So I have an arsenal of material, and still trying to get, things that, an agent and all of those above, and really looking at how the world has changed too.
Mm-hmm.
Because something that I follow a lot of different people, Gary Vaynerchuk and Ted Hope for Film, and something that Ted Hope was saying 12, 13, 14 years ago, and another guy who I love so much now, Alex Ferrari. I love me some Alex Ferrari.
Mm-hmm.
Talking about this film entrepreneur, and creating not just a film but a business from it, and understanding that your film can have many lives in different places. Because I spoke on a podcast the other day, and I
Mm-hmm.
said to the interview, I said, the good news is that you have a film on Netflix, and the bad news is that you have a film on Netflix, is because you have that window of, it's picked up and it's in the top 10 and then it disappears. It may be play and be on the service for years, but nobody sees it. You're not getting any press. You're not, it's just turning
Right.
through. Whereas I was thinking about, again, going backward to the Warner Brothers days. And even then we do campaigns for weeks. You would have poster boards and buses. There would be some time where there was a life for the film,
Mm-hmm.
the feature, then you had cable, then you had TV. And that played out over a year sometimes, that life of that film,
Mm-hmm.
even though you didn't have streaming. Now you get that streaming pop and it's gone. You don't hear anything about it. There's no life, along with it. So one of the things that I've been working on specifically with Everglow is incorporating, things in the film itself that has lives in other places and other platforms and other even businesses. One of my characters makes lamps, so I want to launch a lamp company.
Oh.
One of my characters is a poet. We're writing a book of poetry authored by the writer, the character in the script. There's an app in the movie. We're having the app built, So it's creating all these things that make it more than just a film, and it deals a little bit with mental health. It's a romantic dramedy about a horrible breakup that I went through. But and looking at the underlying issues of that, dealing with trauma and what do you call it? Self-sabotage, So in a film, you infuse it with these other things that give it life in other places, other platforms, and other communities. So that's kind of what you see here and what I've been doing, not just about making a film or even a series too. Same thing with the series. There's so much content out here that it's kind of like I thought about it the other day, Richard. It's kind of like I'm taking my Warner Brothers self and I'm doing the Warner Brothers kid now, because understanding the marketing and understanding the world. Like even then I was a kid, like I said, I was in like playground and, but it was because I was also, again, in New York around advertising agencies. I was interacting with these guys. So I understood, I had the innate knowledge of what their role was as advertisers. So here I was looking at, okay, what's going to serve this brand of the Warner Brothers cartoons? Let's put them on frozen foods. They would love that, or let's, make a book out of this or survival kit thing, and they can carry this with them, So it's using the new technologies in kind of the same way that I did back then, 40 years ago, to market.
And that is Season 2, Episode 18 of the Producers Lounge podcast. Thank you to my guest, Carolyn McDonald, for joining us. You can find out more about her by checking out the show notes and visiting our website at greaterandgrander.com, which will include a link to her Instagram @createdbycarolyn. Our intro and outro music today was Snowbound by Dennis Mitchell Tree. Our episode still image is from the film Buffalo Soldiers, owned by Turner Pictures and TNT, director of photography William Wages. If you have any questions or suggestions, we'd love to hear from you. Let us know in the episode comments. You can stay up to date by following us on social media at the handle Greater Grander, all one word. Make sure to subscribe wherever fine podcasts are found, and also, if you like what we do, share this podcast with a friend who you think will enjoy it. Join us next week for more cocktails and questions, and until then, keep producing dream.